So today we're going to make a cracking hybrid sandwich loaf. That's going to use sourdough discard and a pre-ferment. Now after we've got everything mixed up, I'm also going to show you how I designed this recipe using a sourdough calculator. But right now, let's jump back to last night. Okay, so it's 11 o'clock. I'm about to hit the hay, but first I need to make my pre-ferment up for tomorrow. Now I'm going to need about 152 grams, but I'm going to make up 160 because some of it's going to get stuck in the jar. So I've got 80 grams of water. I'm going to add 0.8 grams of instant dried yeast and then 80 grams of strong bread flour. And then this will just get a good mix. So this had a quick mix with a spoon. There's still a few lumps in it, but that's absolutely fine. I'm going to pop a lid on it, and that's going to sit out at 25 degrees Celsius until tomorrow when I bake, which is going to be in about 12 hours. So here we are the next morning, and the pre-ferment has been sitting comfortably at 25 degrees Celsius overnight. That's been about 12 hours or so. The mixture's risen up and then dropped back down, but the bubbles are still visible on the surface. Now in my bowl, I'm adding 213 grams of water, followed by 10 grams of salt. And while that starts dissolving, I'm going to weigh out 1.8 grams of instant dried yeast. I'm going to list the conversions for other types of yeast in the recipe that's linked below. Now once the salt is dissolved, I'm going to add the instant dried yeast. Now I'm adding 152 grams of pre-ferment. Remember, I made a total of 160 grams last night, and that's because some of the pre-ferment tends to stick in the jar, so it's always good to be safe. Next, I'm adding 152 grams of sourdough discard. Now I should say, I don't normally have lots of discard left over. This has actually come from a sourdough starter project that I've been working on lately. And I've got to say, it's been great to have this in the fridge and be able to utilize it for recipes like this. Now I'm adding in 15 grams of barley malt extract, followed by 76 grams of stone ground whole wheat flour. I'm going to blend the ingredients together for about a minute or so, just to make sure that that discard and the pre-ferment are well blended with the other ingredients. Now I'm adding 279 grams of strong white bread flour. The one I'm using today has got a protein content of 13%. You can blend the whole wheat flour and the white flour together before adding them to the other ingredients. That does make the mixing a touch easier. Now as soon as the mixture is too stiff to mix with a spoon, I dampen my hand with water and then finish mixing it into a rough dough. Once it's at this stage, it's going to sit covered at 25 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. Right, so I'm going to show you how I brought this recipe together. You're also going to see how easy it is for you at home to make simple adjustments so this recipe suits you. Right, so I needed 900 grams of dough to fit my baking tin, so that's going to be my dough weight. And I found that using 30% of sourdough discard and 30% of pre-ferment produces a really well-balanced flavour. Now I've split the flour. I've got 85% strong white bread flour and 15% whole wheat. And that hydration should be good at 72%. And in this entire recipe, I'm going to be using just 0.5% of dried yeast. Salt's going to be at 2%. And I'm adding 3% of barley malt syrup. It's going to add that really nice malty flavour, and it's not too sweet. Now using a calculator like this is really easy. I can adjust the ferments, the ingredients, and then at the end it spits out all of the ingredients I need for the main recipe. So it's really easy for recipe design. Now you're more than welcome to use this one. It's in a Google Doc format and it's completely free. I'll link to it below. And for all of my email subscribers, you'll be able to access your copy in this week's community email. Right, so that 30-minute rest has given the flour a chance to hydrate, which is going to make the kneading process a little bit easy, or certainly less sticky. Now I'm going to knead this dough for about 2 minutes, and you probably know I'm not a huge fan of kneading if it's not needed. And this dough is going to be baked in a tin, so I'm not worried about building optimum strength. Plus, this is going to have several hours to ferment, and the dough is going to build gluten structure over time. I'm going to cover this once again, and it's going to be left to ferment at 25 degrees Celsius. Right, so it's been about an hour and 45 minutes since mixing, and the dough's risen by about 75%. Now I guess I could shape this now at a push, but I prefer to stretch the dough out and then bring it back together into a ball. This is less about building strength and more about gently degassing the dough so that it can prove once more and extend that fermentation period. This dough is going to sit covered again until it's roughly doubled in size. And remember, the warmer your kitchen, the quicker the fermentation process will happen. The cooler your kitchen, the longer things will take. This is definitely worth remembering. It's now been 2.5 hours since the dough was mixed, and it's just about doubled in size. But before I shape the dough, I'm going to lightly coat the inside of this tin with olive oil. These are non-stick, but as a matter of habit, I always oil the inside. Now, if you're looking for a good bread tin, these are great. I've been baking with the same ones since the start of the channel. I'll link to them down in the video description. So I'm lightly dusting the dough with white flour and then gently turning it out onto the work surface. I'm quite simply going to pull this out into a rough circle. I want the dough to degas a little, but we don't want to hammer it completely flat. Now, after the sides are folded into the middle, the dough can be rolled up into a long cylindrical shape, about the length of the tin that you're using. And then after the dough's placed inside, it's going to sit, it's going to prove once again at 25 degrees Celsius until the top of the dough has just risen above the tin. Okay, it's been 1.5 hours since I placed the dough into the tin, and it's been 4 hours since I mixed the dough. This is going to bake in an oven that's been preheated to 200 degrees Celsius. Now, if you're going to bake this on a stone, then it's going to take about 35 minutes. And if you're placing the tin on an oven shelf, then bake it for 40. Don't forget, temperatures and times will be listed in the recipe on the blog, which is linked down below. Right, so with a baking setup like this, my stone lives in the oven pretty much all of the time. So I invert a small baking tray on top of the stone to protect the bottom of the loaf from that direct heat from the stone. Then I invert another baking tray above, which just shields that heat that comes directly from the elements and stops the top of the loaf over baking. Right, so after you've removed your loaf from the oven, gently turn it out of the tin and then leave it to cool completely before slicing. This has been cooling for 1 hour and 20 minutes and the smell is absolute torture. So let's have a little slice into this loaf. Now this for me is a proper farmhouse style loaf. It smells and feels like proper bread. And when a loaf like this comes out of the oven, your brain starts firing with ideas of how to use it. And this could be used for many things, but for me, this is quintessential sandwich bread at its best. So you get the sourdough flavour coming through from the discard. It's not over the top, it's not in your face. It's really well balanced with the other ingredients. This bread tastes mature from the long fermentation period. Because we didn't use a lot of yeast, but we used a Pre Ferment, you haven't got this overbearing commercial yeast taste. So really good bread. And the barley malt syrup comes through as well. It doesn't make this sweet, it just gives it some balance. And you definitely get that malty flavour come through. This is like a winter bread. It's a substantial bread. It kind of makes you feel warm. I'm extremely pleased with this. Now every couple of weeks or so when we sit down to watch a movie, I make like this massive Detroit style pizza. And lately I've been doing that with sourdough discard. So if that's something you'd like to see, let me know down below. And don't forget, check out the written recipe for this week's bread on the blog and get your copy of the calculator. And I should tell you that I have just about nailed that chocolate and cherry sourdough from last week's video. So that's going to be coming soon too. A huge thank you for watching. I'll see you again very soon. Stay tuned.